So the threat from attackers is ever increasing. And actually, this is both in terms of impact and the volume of attacks that we're seeing. And they're becoming more visible, particularly in the press. We're seeing lots of brand damage, but also affecting trust with our customers, but also affecting our customers in terms of direct impact upon them. We can call out several attacks, whether it's Co-op, whether it's the M&S breach, Harrods, most recently Jaguar Land Rover. Each of these are directly affecting the customers, partly through their ability to shop and procure products from each, but also in many of those attacks, the release of personal data, which is obviously quite a big threat. Again, that just goes back to damaging brand, damaging trust. And the nature of these attacks has very much evolved. We've seen this in the spate of those retail attacks that I mentioned, and as I say, also in Jaguar Land Rover. And these are all interlinked through attacker groups, working loosely together as a collective. And in the case of Jaguar Land Rover, we're seeing scattered Lapsus Hunter, so scattered spider group crossed with the Lapsus group, crossed with shiny Hunter group. So we're seeing that as that loose collective rather than being a specific set of attackers. And they're working together, sharing knowledge, sharing techniques, tactics. And actually, in a lot of these attacks we've seen, so take Harrods, for example, Jaguar Land Rover, we've seen this is not the first attack that has occurred. Now, some of them have slight differences, but what is common across many attacks is that there are more than one attack, which we can link that together with is it the initial foothold that's being shared on their back doors being left in environments, that eradication not being fully completed, which is obviously a very important part of incident response. And these impactful attacks are targeting people within that organization, rather than just targeting individual systems. And additionally, on top of that, targeting third parties, whether that's an outsourced IT service or contractors that an organization is working with and have access to the environment. And so now really your security posture is only as good as your end users, and only as good as the security posture of our third parties. From an impact perspective, this is really what has become very visible. Whether the breach has been successfully responded to or not, in most cases we're still seeing an element of downtime and impact. And the difference between the two, successfully responded to or not so successfully responded to, and the impact there, is the amount of time that we see being offline, so that downtime, and the size of the impact. And we can actually look at that with two of the retail breaches that we've seen. So if we look at Co-op Group, they are purportedly, one of the good examples of responding. Yes, they had personal data and customer data exfiltrated from the organization, but they discovered the attack before the ransom had really been executed, before they were locked out of systems, and they took that proactive step to pull the plug on the internet, to remove themselves, which instantly removed attacker access, so they could work methodically through their environment to be able to ensure that threat was fully eradicated. So that had a few weeks impact, and actually their downstream third parties, the ones that they supplied, had a knock-on effect that probably spread over that 2-week period, but they weren't down for weeks and months on end, which is obviously very different to Marks and Spencer's. I'm sure there's a multitude of different reasons, but obviously they were down, and their online ordering down for a significant amount of time. But impact needs to, when we're thinking about impact, it needs to extend beyond just that direct business and brand damage. We also need to consider regulatory obligations, that speed of disclosure, speed or scope of the exposure, and the potential fines that may go along with that. So, really, being breach ready now is incredibly important and should be a top priority, and perhaps even the top priority. And it's a priority that is not going to leave that list, and it needs to be continuous and evolving with the organization. Our team of experts see this over and over, the challenges that an organization faces in response to an incident, but actually all the way through from, when an incident is only just starting. One of those is people and culture. Nothing impacts incident response more than not knowing about an incident until it's far too late. Putting the responders well on the back foot from the off. And too often, users aren't equipped with the tools, with the knowledge to defend against attacks targeting them, to spot malicious activity, to know how to raise it properly. And they end up simply not reporting them. And sometimes this is especially true, when they've done something that we could deem as wrong, opening an attachment, clicking on a link, not feeling that they can raise that successfully, or I say successfully, raise that comfortably to the organization. Visibility is another problem and a challenge that organizations face, and incident responders that are assisting that organization face. A lack of visibility into the threat, into its activity, severely hampers the response. The response teams then are effectively flying blind. So not having that view of all of that activity, access to the data, access to the systems, at that point and before the point, as far back as possible, because it's important that we need to understand the root cause analysis. What is the earliest point of that incident? When we're looking at how we're responding, we need to be able to move back through our backups, but you've got to ask that question. If backdoors are being left in for that command and control access, which ones of our backups have that backdoor in? So how far do we need to go back? So visibility is critically important and always a challenge. Even from the example of what do we do in the immediate aftermath of identifying potentially a system is compromised. Too often our incident response teams find that actually the action that was taken, which was the immediate reaction, was to shut the machine down. Now, obviously, yes, that contains that system, but it also eradicates the in-life or the live memory within that system, which means that the forensics activity is extremely hampered at that point. We also see a lack of incident response processes being a challenge, and that's again really down to the reaction and the actions that are taken, and that's down to having no clear roles and responsibilities defined, and that's something that's over and over again an issue, because the impact there is that teams are unable to make an effective response, and really are also unable to make decisions and the right decisions and acting swiftly to be able to contain, eradicate, and respond to that threat. And really what that leads to is the IT, the security leaders, and beyond being like rabbits in the headlights. And this is completely avoidable. Our teams are there to support, but also to get ahead of that. And it's not just technical teams that we find this as a challenge in. It needs to extend out into crisis management, the full crisis management. This has to involve senior leaders right up to the exec team. I mean, this is a crisis after all. Any incident, major incident that is going to have this impact is a crisis that needs everybody involved and playing their roles. And again, too often senior teams are underprepared to deal with this issue, whether it's how do we communicate externally, what are we legally obliged to do, and also making those tough decisions. If we reflect back on the co-op incident activity, making that decision to completely take themselves offline, that's going to be a very senior decision, and being armed with the right information to make that decision and understanding some of those impacts is obviously critically important. And this is kind of the last piece of the jigsaw that we see as challenges. Is training and execution of plans. So even where organizations have a response plan that they have developed, quite often when you review the response plan, it's been many years since since it's been written or updated, and invariably they are not executed. So people don't understand, or they've not played through a real life scenario in their environment. Think about what they should do, exactly what their roles and responsibilities are, the actions they need to take, the communication they need to provide. And that really hinders response, because that lack of trained people and that lack of testing of plans. Based on all of the challenges that organizations face when becoming breach ready and the challenges in responding to a breach, we can reflect on each one of those and look at how should we be setting ourselves up for success. When it comes to the people, really they need the support of a security culture that helps them defend against attacks targeting them, encourages them to spot suspicious behavior, importantly, doesn't penalize them for mistakes, and really encourages them to raise their hand and say, "Do you know what, I've either carried out this activity that I think probably wasn't the best thing to do," or be able to raise, "Do you know what, I've seen some suspicious activity. I think that it needs to be looked into," or even asking that question, even of a phishing email, having the facility to be able to get that phishing email reviewed to understand, actually, is that legitimate or not? Or, importantly, if it is analyzed and found that it is malicious, enables the teams to be able to look at the wider inboxes to see, are there other instances of it, and have other people clicked on the link, opened that attachment. So, really, the sooner that IT and security teams get visibility incident, the sooner we can respond and kick off that response effort to limit the impact. Really, the takeaway there is that our users really are our first line of defense against many, many threats, and empowering them can only be beneficial. And then that really brings us on to, if we're looking at getting that early warning and early indication of a threat, it brings us nicely into visibility, because without that visibility of the threat, without visibility of the environment, it's incredibly hard and incredibly difficult to be able to orchestrate a successful response. So we need to be thinking about, actually, how do we provide that visibility? There's actions that I spoke about previously that we can take, or the actions we shouldn't take to enable that visibility in the in-life memory, to affect the in-life memory of a system. But also when we think about our capabilities that we have, how can we collect all of that log and telemetry, store it securely, and really enable organizations and responders to be able to access that information, to be able to understand the breadth of the incident, the breadth of the breach, and then orchestrate that successful response. And when a breach does happen, organizations need those robust processes that they can rely upon. And that is one of the challenges that we see, not having them in place. And they need to think about, even at the low level, it's building in that ability, making sure that capability is there to be able to triage, investigate, and contain. That's really getting ahead of the game as much as possible. But also, we need to live in a world where we understand that it's not a case of if we're going to get breached, but it's a case of when we're going to get breached. So we need to have those clear processes, clear escalation procedure to engage incident response. And that's whether it's an internal incident response team, whether it's an external incident response team, or a hybrid between the two. And everyone needs to understand their roles. Everyone needs to understand their responsibilities, and also they need to understand what is expected of them. And we need to have that plan. This is where incident response playbooks become so important. It's essential that these are defined. Really, that is incident response readiness. As I say, clear roles and responsibilities, a defined incident response team. Who are you going to call? If it's not a capability you have internally, make sure that you have that team defined, understand who you're working with to be able to place that call and get the help when you really need it. And then you need to have your response plans defined and documented. Those playbooks to hand that can be used to guide the response. And even if it's an external incident response team, to make sure that they are engaged to understand the environments, they have some domain knowledge and readiness up front. That's all in the name of supporting that incident response process. Act faster, limit the impact. Very simple. And obviously all of this is all wasted if it's not tried, it's not tested, and if all the important players are not trained and aware, so they don't know what to do. Fixing those, doing the training, running these exercises will enable calmer heads to prevail. It'll enable swift decision making, swift action, and concise and accurate communication. And that's really important, communicating through the business, but also not just to the business. It needs to go up to be able to extend and cover external communications, to look at actually how can we limit the impact to our brand, and how can we comfort our customers. And really that information needs to flow up to the very top so that we can process that, work with our PR partners, with our legal partners, with incident response to be able to build that effective response and effective lines of communication. So to do this, we need to make sure we're running tabletop exercises. An organization should run both technical exercises, testing the technical processes and the teams during that initial aftermath, how they're going to investigate, how they're going to respond. So that speed of response to the first inkling of or inclination of a breach or attack, but also running them at the exec level. So taking that lower level exercise, taking the learnings from that and the outputs and bringing that up and rerunning it with the exec level team so they can understand what actions they need to take and they can start thinking that through so that when it does happen, as I say, we're not rabbits in the headlights. We know what we're going to do. We are prepared and for swift action. And then lastly, which kind of goes hand in hand, those plans that we've put together to respond to an incident need to be tested to ensure that they work. That needs to be part of that exercise. It needs to be done regularly. We don't need to, or we don't want to be in that situation where we have some plans we've built, they're put to one side, and we're not testing them on an ongoing basis. And part of that reason that we want to test them is because the environment will change, it will adapt, and it will evolve. And we need to make sure that any testing plans, any response plans are tested to make sure that they have adapted and evolved with our environment, with our priorities, with our critical systems as they change. Integrity 360, with our army of experts that live this day in, day out, can help and assist overcome all of these challenges, and most importantly, help organizations in their time of need. As any incident is a challenging time for everybody involved, whether it's the internal staff, whether it's the IT teams who are directly trying to work to fix this and feeling under a lot of scrutiny and pressure, or whether it's the execs, or whether it is the customers that are experiencing that impact. And we can help to cover each one of these elements, each of the challenges as a whole. So stepping in to help build that security culture and behaviors, working to help enhance the security posture of your users through security awareness training and behaviors, from helping define and mature your incident response plans so that your teams have something to fall back on when an incident occurs, particularly making them incident specific. So depending on the type of incident, what's the activities, what's the actions you should take to follow that through. And then lastly, actually running those tabletop exercises, testing those response plans. So working with both the technical teams, but also the exec teams to make sure the entire organization, top to bottom, is equipped and able and capable of responding to an incident to prevent its impact.